Anybody who's ever served in uniform, anybody who's still serving in uniform, anybody who's ever been in any kind of bureaucratic process that's tied to government, what they have seen is your new tranche of recruits every year are full of zest and zeal and ideology and passion for what they believe it means to serve the public.
Exactly right.
And then as every year goes by, they are ground down to a more mediocre average. And then the people who are still have burrs on their shoulders, the people who are still a little bit ornery, either find their way out or they get kicked out or they're pulled out in some way. And once you get to the senior most levels of decision making, those people have already there's a turning point between 7 and 12 years where you really have to
so true.
Where you really have to make your decision. Am I going to make a life out of this?
So true.
Or am I going to pull parachute and get out of this?
An old timer told me by year 10, you can see who's going to be a leader and who's not. And the ones who aren't are going to leave.
And it has nothing to do with leadership.
No.
It has to do with whether you're going to follow the bureaucratic process. I mean, we call it riding coattails.
Yeah.
We call it having grandfathers.
Having a rabbi.
Yep.
Let me tell you a quick story. And I've told you this story, but it's important and it bears repeating. So when I was still in analysis, this would have been the mid-1990s. The office that I had worked for, the Office of Leadership Analysis, ceased to exist while I was serving overseas.
Under Clinton?
Yes, Bill Clinton. So I came back and I was assigned to the Office of Near Eastern and South Asian Analysis. One of the group chiefs, which was a GS-15, the general service scale goes up to 15, and then above that is the senior intelligence service. One of the GS-15 deputy group chiefs was John Brennan. John was, he was a mid-level nobody, a mid-level functionary.
What year was this?
This was 1996.
96, he was a GS-15.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is actually the point of the story. So there was nothing special about John. He had a BA from Fordham in history. Nothing special about this guy at all. And he worked for a woman named Martha Kessler, and Martha was something special. She was the U.S. government's acknowledged expert on Syria and had written the definitive book on Syria called Syria, Fragile Mosaic of Power. And everybody had to read Martha's book when you got assigned to NISA. So Christmas of 1996, I remember this like it was yesterday. He goes to Martha and he says, Martha, I've been your deputy for whatever it was, 4 years, 5 years. I think I'm ready for the Senior Intelligence Service and I want your blessing to apply for XYZ job. She said, I don't like you. I've never liked you, and you will never be in the Senior Intelligence Service. In fact, you're fired. So at the agency, you're not really fired. If
you're shuffled.
Yeah, you're shuffled. So if they tell you you're fired, you have 6 weeks to walk the halls and find another job. And if you can't find a job in 6 weeks, then you're fired. Okay? It's Christmas time. The normal job turnover is in the summer. So there are no jobs at Christmas over vacation. So Brennan is going office to office to office looking for a job. He finds one opening. It's in the President's Daily Brief, the PDB staff. And for analysts, if you're serious about analysis, you're going to end up in the PDB staff eventually, either as a briefer or as an editor. They have one opening, and it's for the lowest level. It's to brief the lowest level person entitled to a PDB briefing. And that is the National Security Council's Director for Intelligence Programs, who at the time happened to be George Tenet. So, John is this short, squat, ugly, pock-faced dude. And George is a short, squat, ugly, pock-faced dude.
Tell me how you really feel, John.
Yeah. Both chomping on cigars. I won't get into their personal lives, but they're equally disgusting. So Brennan goes down to the White House, introduces himself to George. They immediately hit it off. Now, George had just had a heart attack, so he promised his wife he wouldn't smoke. Well, there used to be a kiosk at the corner of 17th and Pennsylvania Avenue. It's not there anymore. And the guy sold magazines and newspapers and cigars and gum and stuff like that. So they would do the briefing at the White House, walk over to the kiosk, smoke a cigar, George would go back to the White House and John would go back to the agency. Next thing you know, George is named deputy CIA director. So he calls Brennan and he makes Brennan the deputy director of the Office of Near Eastern and South Asian Analysis, Martha Kessler's boss. And he calls Martha in on his first day and he says, now you're fired.
Ooh.
And so she was gone. She packed up her shit and she left. We never saw her again. Next thing you know, there's a realignment. And I mean, he was only in the job for like 6 weeks. There's a realignment and they merged a bunch of offices and there was a more senior guy who took John's job. So George made John, he says, listen, you're going places with me. So I'm going to make you station chief in Riyadh. Direct line of communication between the director of the CIA and the king himself. And he's there for like 5 years. Well, this also gives him operational experience, which he had never had. So then he comes back from Riyadh. They make him the executive director of the CIA, the third ranking officer in the entire CIA. And then from there, he becomes the head of the National Counterterrorism Center, the first one, by the way. Then he becomes the deputy national security advisor for counterterrorism. Then he becomes the director of the CIA.
Wow.
Does
he's a
anybody
CBS
remember?
voice.
Yeah. Does anybody remember Martha Kessler or know what she's doing?